Well, I think government-funded research is going to be really, really important, Tim. There's been a lot of work that's been done, and I was involved in some of it, looking at just how do we fund? Are we spending enough time, enough investment publicly and through governments and other mechanisms investing in AI and a few of these foundational technologies? And quite frankly, the short answer is we're not. If you think about the history of R&D investment, and even science-based investment in the US economy, its peak was in 1964, actually.
Wow.
And since then, and then it was roughly about 2% of GDP. If you look at all the system level R&D in the system, it's been coming down ever since as a percentage of our GDP. So the question is, how do we do that? And yet we have other countries, China being an example, the prominent example, obviously, where obviously starting from a much lower base, they're investing at a much faster clip into these foundational technologies, whether you think about AI or synthetic biology or any of these kind of foundational technologies. So we have to spend and invest a heck of a lot more than we're doing so far. Much of the R&D today in AI and these related technologies is mostly being done by a few private sector companies, and so we have to do a heck of a lot more. I think it also goes to another topic which seems to have come up in the chat, which is these issues of use and misuse and even national security. I think one of the really challenging things about AI, unlike other things you might think of in a weaponized sense, whether it's nuclear weapons or chemical weapons, is that at least with those other systems, A, they're very costly to put together and even to use. And B, when somebody uses them, you can find out, right? It's impossible to set off a nuclear weapon on the planet anywhere without anybody knowing. But when it comes to these AI technologies, which can be incredibly weaponized, you don't know. So when the power grid goes out, was it just a power grid failure? We don't know, right? So the detectability of the misuse of AI creates these much, much more complex questions about misuse, whether it's from criminals, from terrorists, or from authoritarian governments, et cetera, et cetera. So these are new kinds of questions we're going to have to grapple with these new capabilities.
And the only addition that I have on what James said right now is it's actually worse than just money going to universities. Part of what I saw in the last 20 years sitting at Google was that we had the best and the biggest data sets. Same for Facebook. So if you were a doctoral student, it made so much more sense to come work in my ads team because you got to train your models on 5 billion queries every day, as opposed to a data set of 40,000 words at some university data set, and maybe not a whole lot of compute. There are like structural issues that we have to solve in just encouraging this kind of basic research. Yes, it's money, but by now, it's far more interesting as a computer scientist to work at a large tech company than it is to sit away in some corner lab.